Well, things aren't looking very good at all for Brexit in the UK. It seems that Boris Johnson's sort of Hail Mary to save Brexit, his last sort of secret weapon against the Remainers, ended up being a dud. And that, of course, was the proroguing of, I believe that's how you say the word, of Parliament for 5 weeks. The idea being that if Boris Johnson can just get Parliament out of Westminster and make sure that they don't do anything for a few weeks, we'll get to the point to where it's too late before October the 31st, and that they won't be able to stop Brexit. Johnson really is just trying to stall at this point because one, the EU will never give the UK a deal if they know that the UK isn't going to walk away, and two, a no-deal Brexit really is the only Brexit. So, I mean, if you support Brexit, you kind of want a no-deal Brexit. And Parliament's made that clear from the very beginning, long before there was ever a Brexit vote, that they will never support that, that they'll never let that happen, that they will do everything they can to overturn the Brexit vote. But the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom, and actually I didn't even know they had a Supreme Court, frankly, because I always thought that the way that the UK worked is that they don't really have they don't have a written constitution, and so it wouldn't make sense that they have like a Supreme Court that would, be there to interpret it. I would just think that it would be left up to, some random judge somewhere. But evidently they do have a Supreme Court. And they've decided that Johnson's decision to prorogue Parliament, or rather his decision to advise the Queen to prorogue Parliament, I believe that's how it works, is unconstitutional. And of course it's very subjective, I believe, because, like I said, the UK doesn't have a written constitution like the US, and I know how much the US Supreme Court twists the meaning of the US Constitution, and it's written down on paper, so it's much harder to do in that case. So I think it would be much easier for the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom to twist the meaning of their supposed constitution when it's not even written down. It's just essentially, whatever the judge feels it should mean. But nevertheless, that is what the court has ruled, and it looks like Parliament is going to be back in session today. John Bercow, the contemptible Speaker of the House of Commons, the one who's famous for shouting "Order!" That guy, he has immediately after the Supreme Court ruling came out and said, "Yep, Parliament's back in session now." And the way that the court ruled it is that they're saying that Johnson was so wrong that in fact Parliament was never out of session. It was never prorogued to begin with, so they're not even ending the proroguing. They're completely, they're retroactively undoing it. And of course, that means that Parliament has plenty of time now to pass all sorts of laws that will stop Brexit, because that's what they want. That's really the only thing that Parliament agrees on these days, and that's not really a matter of what party you're in the UK, because really everyone and across the parties, they hate Brexit. Of course, there are also some MPs who are bravely trying to stand up for the results of the referendum and carry out, the will of the people as expressed in that referendum. But they are few and far between. Ironically, what the Supreme Court said in their ruling is that it was in fact Boris Johnson who inhibited British democracy, who was going against the will of the people as represented by the Parliament. And so if I were a Remoaner, I'd be feeling quite content this morning, because really there's not much left that Boris can do to save Brexit. Really the only option at this point is another election. But before I get to that, a word on Dominic Cummings. Dominic Cummings was, as I went over in a video a few weeks ago, he was the architect of this strategy. Dominic Cummings had been telling Tory party donors that he'd come up with some super secret strategy that was a surefire way of ramming Brexit through whether Parliament wanted it or not. And he thought that, this was their big secret weapon, and that, this was their last resort, and this was going to completely make Brexit a sure thing. And of course, it failed spectacularly. So Dominic Cummings looks like a real buffoon right now, and he certainly has done a good bit of damage to the cause of Brexit. because this strategy not only failed, it backfired quite a bit. It has given the Remoaners the upper hand. And that likely is why Nigel Farage is coming out and saying that Dominic Cummings needs to resign immediately as an advisor to the Prime Minister, and that he needs to be out of government immediately. Nigel Farage, of course, has said from the beginning that the only way that to save Brexit would be through another election. He was saying that certainly long before Dominic Cummings unveiled his whole proroguing Parliament strategy. Farage, maintained that really what they needed is they just need to make sure that Brexiteers had a majority in the Parliament, so that they could make sure that Brexit did indeed finally happen. And I must admit, I was quite skeptical of Farage's plans originally, because, and I gave the caveat that I'm not too familiar with UK politics, but it seemed to me that if Johnson was able to get Brexit through without having to call an election, I didn't see the reason why they should call an election. I just thought that that was adding too much risk. If he was able to do it with the current Parliament, then he should just go ahead and do it. And I still think that is correct in principle. Although it looks like really Johnson, there's nothing that he can do with this current Parliament. The only way that Brexit is going to happen is if there is indeed an election and a new Parliament is sworn in that will not stop Brexit. Now, of course, the Remoaners in Parliament have already stopped Johnson's attempts at calling another election, so I don't know if that will at all be possible. May in fact be that they'll be able to keep blocking a new election even until the fated date of October the 31st, in which they will have passed laws saying essentially that Britain can't leave the EU on that date, and the UK will just stay in the EU in limbo in perpetuity. But it's pretty ironic that the people who supposedly are the voices of the people, the folks who are the channel through which the democratic will is imposed on the government, as they like to fancy themselves, it's quite interesting that they are so opposed to another election, because if they truly do represent the will of the people, then they should have no fear when it comes to a new election. But anyway, if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day, and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.